Welcome to Eternal Journey, the podcast.
What is up, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Jedi, also known as Caesar the Crowd Pleaser, and this week on episode 31, I'm kind of excited, honestly, and a little worried. We're going to be doing a deep dive into power bases and splashing. That's right. We are sadly coming to the end of this draft format with the release of the new set coming out sometime this month. Not really locked in as to what time, but we're super excited about that. We haven't even seen any of the real mechanics for it, and they said there's 5 new mechanics. But anywho, I figured, especially with this format, allowing the 5-color good stuff to be a relevant archetype, as pushed by the guys at Farming Eternal, especially Ben Gracier. Shout out to those guys. They do a fantastic job. So I decided to go ahead and do a little bit of a deep dive to kind of break down the actual number crunching and math behind how to build your power base to accommodate 2 colors, 3 colors, 4, not so much 4, and then 5. I kind of skipped 4 just because I didn't want to throw too many numbers out. My brain started to hurt, and 4 and 5 colors I feel like starts to kind of overlap quite a bit. But yeah, guys, that's what we're going to be doing today. So I am going to be going straight into the number, like we're going to be doing math. Math is today. This is not going to be theory crafting. I might throw a little bit of a personal opinion in there from time to time, but it will be focused on the actual numbers because science. But as usual, a little bit of housekeeping. I want to go ahead and mention the YouTube channel. That's right. EJthePodcast, or you can look up Eternal Journey on the search engine at your YouTube, and you will find me. And this is where you can find all my both online and offline content online. This means I have draft videos, I have sealed videos, I have tournament reports. Haven't quite started doing update videos just yet, but I might start doing that, just all based on time. But either way, you guys can go on there and find all kinds of great content that you can consume when I am not live. Speaking of live, you can catch me stream every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday morning Central Time at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. I do primarily limited, but I do change it up, do some constructed, start to incorporate some viewer brews on Sunday. So definitely hang in there. Let me know what you think about this draft format as far as how often you splash, if you are the 5-color good stuff kind of person, or a little more conservative like I am, doing 2 colors with a slight splash. And finally, oh yeah, and don't forget, guys, if you guys want, you can follow me on Twitter, EJthePodcast on Twitter, to stay up to date when new episodes go up, when I go live, when videos go up, all that shenanigan good stuff. All right, and finally came to the shout out portion of the show. I'd like to give a shout out to Sunnyvale and Just a Lazy Gamer. They are both phenomenal Eternal streamers. I believe for the most part, they both do constructed. I'm sadly unable to watch them very often, but I do enjoy their show when I do get to watch them. And yeah, they both gave me raids this week, so I really do appreciate that. It's one of the things I really like about the Eternal community is the fact that we're so friendly, both on and off camera, and we help support each other and this game that we love so much. And as far as on a live stream, the other thing is Disastrous Strats. Thank you so much for the cheers today, or this week, sorry. Joined on randomly. He took a break from Eternal, came back, I'm trying to be a little bit better about that until I identify what people are. I want to keep it neutral, so I'm friendly to everybody. So they came on the stream, just wanted to hang out, randomly selected me from the, Discover page or whatnot, and ended up enjoying it and followed and gave me some cheers. So I really appreciate that very much. So it means a lot. Thank you so much, Disastrous Strats. You rock. All right, guys, moving into our pack 1, pick 1. Let's do this. So at the commons, we have Yeti Instigator, 3 for 3. Plenty serviceable, fine, don't mind. Primal did get an upgrade on 6.5, so it's a little more playable, and I don't mind taking that. We have Winnow, the 6 Shadow slow spell that has warp, and enemy units get a -1/-1. Meh, I think I've played it one time, and it was a reluctant playable. We have Roosting Warhawk, the 3/2 flying bird for 5 and a justice. Yep. And Onslaught +1/+1. Yeah, this card's a good staple in justice decks. Not crazy. Most of the time it's a 4/3. Very rarely do you end up playing as a 3/2. We have Char, the deal 2 damage to an enemy fast spell for 1 and red. This card has immense flexibility and it's solid. I like that. It'd probably in a vacuum take Char over Warhawk just because it is the more versatile card and the lower casting cost. Fragility, not going to be a thing. Auric Lookout, 2/3 endurance. Summon Scout, shift 2 for 3 and a justice. And I actually had Kalibovich up in the chat the other day and found out that he is actually not very high on Lookout, which was quite interesting to me. I am not 100% sure. We didn't have a full drawn out discussion about it. It was a consideration to make the cut or take out of the deck in a win chest go wide strategy. So it was fighting against things like manufacture and scavenge. So that might have been why he didn't like it. But yeah, so that's one of the first times I've come across a serious like discrepancy between me and some of the other big time drafters. But it is still awesome to have them in chat. Oh yeah, so shout out to Caleb for hanging out in chat and giving me some pointers and just adding humor to the chat. I really appreciate it. I like Lookout. I think it's extremely flexible. I think the body and the endurance comes into play more often than you think, especially if you're able to pump it once or twice. So I like Lookout, but still Char probably. Direwolf Looker is a finisher, but not really worried about it. Diving Terrax, another replaceable level card. Going into the uncommons, we have Illicit Armament. No, we're not the armory deck. Clan Barracks, which is a little bit of a mean card, but does come together with, I believe, Mum, Mand, and Mouse had some success with the card. I did all right with it the one time I really went all in. The other times I've drafted it, the deck just wasn't there, so I gave up on it. But it is the 7 and a red relic. When you scout, play a 4/4 warrior and onslaught scout. So at the bare minimum, you're paying 7 for a 4/4 warrior. And we have Blurry Stygimoloch, the 7/6 dinosaur with overwhelm for 10 and a time. But as some rules text, Blurred Stygimoloch costs 7 less, i.e. 3, if you have 7 attack or more among your units. Yeah, 98% of the time you're playing this for 3. And the card is absolutely backbreaking because you are definitely cheating it on cost. And sometimes, even if your opponent has a way of getting rid of it, in most cases they're sacrificing the majority of their board and still putting you in a very good spot. So Blurred Stygimoloch, you are the pick. Our rare though is a Spyglass. It is a +1/+1 weapon for 1 and a blue. When the wielder attacks, scout. When you have scouted 6 times, sacrifice Spyglass to play 4 1/1 Yeti Spies. I know some other drafters are high on this card. I do think it's okay. Obviously, it's in Primal where you have quite a bit of flying, so you can get in there. That being said, +1/+1. The Scout is relevant. The Scout Matters deck, I feel like, took a hit in 6.5. And just a +1/+1 isn't that exciting. I've seen it go off, I think, one time. In most cases, the unit was either unable to attack or it died before it was able to scout 6 times. One thing it will say is just when you have scouted 6 times, period, since it has been in play. So you don't have to necessarily attack with the unit 6 times. You can attack with the unit 3 times and then have like a Blurry Chaser twice and then like a Streets of Flames or stuff like that. Will still cost Spyglass to trigger and go off. But yeah, I think just because of sheer power level and ability to close out the game, we're going to take a Blurred Stygimoloch here. Stiggy, you are amazing. All right, guys, that's going to do it for our Pack 1, Pick 1, and all our intro stuff. So, you know what time it is? It's time for our main topic. So, power bases, right? It is actually one of the most important fundamentals in limited and constructed play because at the end of the day, if you do not construct your power base correctly, then it doesn't matter how well your deck is built or what kind of amazing cards you have in it. You can't play them, then your deck's just gonna drown and flounder and all the other kind of comparisons that kind of go into not playing well and dying. So the foundation for a power base. Most draft decks are 45 cards, and they play somewhere around between 18 units, then 9 spells or relic cards or weapons, attachments, things like that, and then somewhere about 18 power. right? So what this means is it can fluctuate. I've seen decks go down to as low as 15 or 16 power when they have lower curves or higher fixing, which we'll talk about in a moment, or obviously decks running 18 power when they have ways of filtering through like loot effects, i.e. draw and discard, as well as heavy influence requirement cards or a higher top end, 7, 8, 9 cost cards like that. For example, last week in our drafting, we ended up taking a Martyr's Chains, which is a 9 cost relic, which in most cases you will never get to in limited, but we managed to take it at the beginning of pack 2, and so we decided to go ahead and give it a shot and adjusted our deck around it. So we did go up to 18 power, as well as taking some valuing ramp cards a little bit higher to play it, because we felt like if we had that in play for 2 or 3 turns, we were just going to win the game on it. So in most limited decks are 2 colors with a potential light splash in a 3rd color for a premium card or 2. There are certain formats or draft formats where they cater to 3 colors or even going all the way up to 5 colors, which is the current format. What dictates this is a combination of fixing as well as the overall value of cards. Like sometimes card value is just not as high. So even if you can play all the colors, you essentially don't want to, or if each color has a certain depth to it. It might have been some of the terms you've heard where there are a lot of power in colors, so you are able to kind of go deep in a color. You don't need to go into other colors to improve the card quality of your deck overall. How far you can stretch your power base is directly related to how good your fixing is. We'll talk about it when I get a little bit lower to it, but obviously you see some people that say, you can just using regular sigils stretch your power base, and that's just not the case whatsoever. One would even make the argument that just in a 2-color deck, having 9 of one sigil and 8 of the other, or some variant of that, is still not the most efficient. But such is life. We have to do what we do. That's why they call it limited, because you have limited resources. But I strongly encourage you to not stretch your power base if you do not have the correct fixing, which is what this show is about. And lastly, just want to mention shiftstoned.com, which is a good resource. I actually have it up on the screen for those of you that are watching this on YouTube. But it is a website where has a influence graph / power. What's the word I'm looking for? Generator or simulator, where you can plug in your deck. You can export your deck from Warcry or from Eternal directly. Go in here, upload it to the database, and it will come out with a chart. And it actually has buttons where you can decrease or increase power bases and make modifications to the deck to find out where your numbers are at. It gives you a graph and all kinds of great stuff like that. So you are able to immediately find out what your chances are of drawing power, having certain influence at certain times, which is one of the things actually the biggest tool that I'm going to be using today, which is how I got these numbers. So I do encourage you guys to use that whenever it is shaky. I personally could use it more often than I do, but as most of you know that catch me streaming live or watch my videos, I am a fairly conservative drafter. I don't really go off the beaten path all that much. I do a little more on stream nowadays, just for entertainment value and stuff. But typically for me, I'm kind of spiky where I don't have to win, but I do enjoy winning. And I like knowing when I have a grasp on the format where I can consistently win. So, all right, let's go into the types of fixing we have. So the one thing that is interesting about Eternal versus, let's just go ahead and Magic the Gathering, which is where most of us double dip at, is the fact that once you have an influence, you are good, and all your power can play for either influence or any of the influences you have. This difference from Magic, where your lands, which are essentially your power, only generate a specific kind of color. And so that comes into play. For example, right, in Eternal, let's say you have a behemoth that requires, a card that has 3 influence of one, and then another card that requires 2 influence of the same color, right? but you played two primal sigils, a Elysian banner, and then 3 time sigils, right? So in Magic, you would only be able to play one of those 2 units because you technically would only have 3 time influence. But in Eternal, you have 3 influence periods, so all 5 of that power generates time. So you're able to play both those units. So hopefully that didn't confuse you guys. So let's go into stuff real quick. We have the banners. Banners are a solid 2-color fixing, and they are power, which is nice, right? This is important because it counts as 2 colors. Because when you play a banner, you will gain the 1 power, which obviously helps you get up your curve, but it will generate influence of both the 2 factions that are in it. So for example, Rakano banner will give you a fire and justice influence. So for mathematic purposes, just take that into consideration as it counts as both sources when you're trying to figure out how many sources of justice and how many sources of fire you have. The next one up are tokens. Tokens essentially on the foundation give you 3-color fixing, but the fact that you have to pick one when you play it means that it really is only one source of fixing, and something to take into consideration. Obviously, when you're looking at your fixing, you can count it under all 3 factions, but once again, you do lose some value in the fact that it is only going to count as 1. So if you're relying very heavily on tokens, there is a chance that you still will not be able to get to the double or triple influences that you are looking for, because of the fact, for example, let's say the wind chest token, it is only going to give you a justice or a shadow or a fire influence when you need it. Sometimes that's all you need and it's perfect because you're missing 1 color, and sometimes you need both, and so it essentially will act like a sigil and do its best impersonation of a sigil. So that's something else to take into consideration. We have insignias, which fall into the same category as banners, so those are great, that's fine. In most cases in this format, if you are splashing, the insignias will automatically come into play depleted, versus the banners have the opportunity to come into play ready, essentially, or not depleted. Take that in consideration. As far as non-power cards, so these things are something to consider because of the fact that they are not straight up power. They are giving you influence, but at a cost. Either a card in your deck or a tempo, i.e. not being able to curve out. First up, which is the MVP, which is Seek Power. Seek Power is 1 generic power, so any color, and it goes in every deck and counts. It's the closest thing to counting as a sigil because of the fact that it immediately goes and gets a basic sigil. Now, one thing to remember, it does only get you a basic sigil. So even though Seek Power will be considered as every color in your deck because of the fact that it can go get any power, it does only get a single power. So similar like what I was talking about with the tokens, that if you require 2 colors, the Seek Power is still only going to get you 1. It does semi-replace itself. You're playing 1 power to go get a power that will come into play readied. So that is something to consider. Another thing is that you do require to have the sigils in your deck. So there is a chance if, for example, you are running some kind of weird power base because you have a ton of fixing and you only have maybe 5 sigils, so 2, 2, 1, there is a chance that if you needed double influence of what you only have 1 sigil of, you might have already played that sigil, and so you cannot get that sigil from your deck with Seek Power. Hopefully that made sense in your head. I feel like I might have made it a little too wordy, but it is what it is. Cargos are also in the format. Cargos allow you to, they kind of do their best impression of Seek Power. The one thing that I will warn you about, which is sometimes an upside and sometimes a downside based on who you're talking to and when you play it. But cargos essentially get you, they fall into the same tri-factions as the tokens. So they act as Seek Power, but they can only get you 1 sigil of any of the 3 factions that are in the respective cargo. The caveat to it, though, as far as why it may be better or worse than a Seek Power, is that if you have double influence of all 3 factions within the cargo, it changes to a contraband, which means it will, you play it for 1 power once again, but then it generates a random spell, a random card, I should say, of each of those factions. So once again, going back to the Winchester cargo, if you have double shadow, double fire, double justice. Then when you play it, it will transmute into a contraband. And when you play it, it will give you a shadow card, a fire card, and a justice card for you to pick from. And then one of those will go to your hand. So you also run into the issue where let's say it's turn 5, you need it to go get your 6th power or your 5th power. And because you played some banners and some insignias, you have double of all the requirements. So it ends up becoming a contraband when you needed it to be a cargo to get you power. So there's another warning on cargo. And then lastly, we have strangers, which are one of the things that facilitate the most colors. These are nice because they kind of do the whole like double banner impersonation thing, except they are taking up a 2-drop slot in your deck, which honestly is pretty replaceable in most cases. So it's kind of free fixing as well. The banners give you 2-color fixing at the cost of nothing because you want to play power anyways. Strangers do something similar to that. Of note, they are not power. So once again, if you need to play a stranger to get your 2nd or 3rd influence of your splash influence, but let's go to turn 5, right? It's turn 5, you have your 5th power, and you have a Rakano stranger in hand, but you can't play your Steel Legion because you only have a single justice influence. Well, playing that stranger will get you your 2nd justice influence, but at the cost of 2 power that turn, and so you won't be able to play your Steel Legion. So things like that, but for the most part, they are pretty free because you want a 2/2 for 2, and that slot is extremely replaceable in most limited decks. So that's why strangers are great, but just a caveat, they do not offer power. All right, guys, those are the forms of fixing in this format. For all intents and purposes, I am going to be focusing on the current draft format because it caters to the 5-color good stuff like I explained earlier, and it just, why not stay current, right? I really feel like the number of episodes I have before the new set comes out is limited. Hopefully we get hopefully we get spoilers on all the mechanics this week, so I can hopefully do a mechanics breakdown next week, but we will see. All right, so let's go into the number crunching, shall we? Okay, so like I said, I used the number crunching from shiftstone.com to produce these numbers, so you guys get the actual math behind it and percentages versus me just kind of winging it. So I'm going to try, the basis for this is work with me the best you can. This is not perfect. Reason being is there's just so much variance to how you can build a power base, what's in your deck, what the requirements are. So this is not going to cover everything, but I do think it's going to give you a good baseline to understand some of the things you're working with, when to be greedy, when not to be, and just kind of not have the wrong impression of how good or bad your deck is going to work due to its power base. So for our foundation, we're going to start with a basic 2-color deck running a 17 power, 9/8 split. Okay. And right now we're going to start with, let's say it's a Rakano deck, so Justice Fire, and we're going to use the double influence War Wagon on turn 3 as our foundation for this, right? This is your very basic down-earth limited deck where you have 2 colors and some of the cards have double requirement. So I went ahead and picked turn 3 because I felt that's pretty early. This one once again has a 0 fixing, so just straight up 9 sigils, right? If you have 8 justice sigils, so let's say you went 9 fire, 8 justice sigils, you will have double justice influence on turn 3 for your War Wagon 58% of the time. So over 50% of your games, you will be able to play War Wagon on 3 should you need to. Granted, I do understand for most of us, we wait to play War Wagon on 5, but I just wanted something, a 3-drop that had double influence. So we're using War Wagon. Let's say your opponent is curving out and they're really smashing you in the face. So you need to play your 3/3 just to get a blocker on the board. So that is that, right? Pretty straightforward. You're over 50%, so that's pretty good. I mean, obviously, in best case scenario, you want to be closer to like 70, 75%, but numbers are numbers. So in a basic 9/8 split for 17 power, so most of your decks, you will have a roughly 58% chance. So about 40% of the time, you will not be able to play your War Wagon on 2. That's something to take in consideration when you think about how far of a run you're going to have. You know what I mean? Like that means, out of 100 games or 10 games, 4 of those games, you're not going to be able to play your War Wagon on 3. Once again, this is a deeper rabbit hole. I'm not going to get too far into that. Just something to consider. Now, using the same deck and flipping it, so now the Justice is 9 Justice, 8 Fire, right? You will be able to play your War Wagon on turn 3 60% of the time. So adding just one basic sigil to the deck, but obviously keeping the same ratio, you are gaining a 2% advantage to playing or ability to. All right, so not really that big of a consideration. So whenever you're really trying to debate about that 9-8 split, there you go. The 1 power really only makes a 2% difference on turn 3. So you can imagine on turn 4, 5, and 6, etc., that is less of an issue as well. So definitely something to consider, when you're really kind of breaking your back over that. Now, for the sake of, once again, this experiment, the fixing I used is Seek Power and Seek Power exclusively. Okay, I did try out a banner as well as a stranger, and they all affected the ratio as far as on shiftstone.com the same. Okay, so I used Seek Power, one, because it goes to get all the fixing, which is obviously our premier, the best kind of fixing we want to use, but also it allowed me to not have to sit there and click a bunch of different things to try to make stuff work. Like, okay, wait, if I use this stranger, it only gives me this influence, etc. That is something you guys will have to consider, and why power bases are so difficult to do. Maybe if you guys want to and you have a specific power base that you thought was interesting, definitely come chat with me live at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ and let me know. Like, tell me, post your deck, let me know what your power base split is, and we'll talk math and stuff. I think it's exciting. So for the rest of this podcast, anytime you hear me say 1, 2, 3, 4 fixing, it is using Seek Power, but as a reference point, using a Rakano Stranger or a Rakano Banner did the exact same thing to the numbers crunching on the program. Okay, so you're not missing on too much information. So 9, 8 split, 9 being Justice from now on, with 1 fixer, so 1 Seek Power in the deck and still 17 power, you have a 65% chance to hit double Justice on turn 3. Okay, of note though, Seek Power does cost a power, so that means you're either missing your 2-drop or missing your 1-drop, or playing it on turn 1 obviously would be ideal to hit that. So that is something to take in consideration, but 65%, like now you're seeing with 1 additional fixer, so 1 stranger, 1 banner, instead of, straight 9 sigils makes, well, I would say this, that if you use a banner, then you would want to make the banner a fire sigil or replace a fire sigil with it. So now you have 10 sources of justice to get this number. So there you go, 65%. And then once again, 9-8 split with 9 justice. If you go to 2 fixers, it once again, surprisingly, is a 5% increase to 70%. So now I'm feeling pretty confident. 70% I feel like is a really good number to consistently hit. And once again, this is on turn 3 that I'm doing this math at. So turn 4, 5, 6, that number actually goes up even higher. And I'll load the graph up for you guys. You guys can see it keeps increasing all the way up to 78%. And actually, that's actually more than that, because that's a different, sorry, I loaded up the graph for my YouTube people, but once again, that's different numbers because I went down. So that is your basic 2-color deck with 17 power, 9-8 split. Double influence on turn 3. Let's move on to a 3-color splash. Once again, 17 power. So 773 power base using all sigils. Okay. And we're going to use once again, the same Rakano deck, and then have a splash of Primal for Frost Elemental and Avalanche Yeti. I know Frost Elemental is ambitious because it is double, but for science purposes, I wanted a double cost. And then we have Avalanche Yeti, which seems pretty viable to splash that, because obviously if you need a 2-drop, which is where we're going to play it for science purposes, we'll play it as a 2-drop, a single influence on your splash, but you obviously want it as your 6-drop as well, as why most people put Avalanche Yeti in their deck. So going back to turn 3 with just straight 17 power, 773 split, i.e. 7 fire, 7 justice, 3 primal, you will have a 51% chance to play your wagon on turn 3. So about half the time you will not be able to play your wagon. That's something to consider for sure. definitely think about that. Now, once again, this is double justice, not single. We will just assume that in most cases you will have, because it is one of your primary colors, you will have it in your opening hand. Your Frost Elemental, you will only have a 9% chance to play that on turn 3. So that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is why most good drafters tell you that you are not splashing a double influence card, especially this early. In most cases, it could be something like a 7 or 8 drop where you have the time to get there and draw those extra sigils. And finally, our Yeti, our Avalanche Yeti, which only requires 1 primal, will have a 45% chance to play it on turn 2. So almost with just a single influence, it is just slightly below the War Wagon being double influence on turn 5. Or turn 3, I'm sorry, turn 3. Okay, same thing, 7/7/3 with 1 Seek power in the deck. Our War Wagon has a 57% chance, so we gain 6 percentage points to play our wagon on 3 by having just an additional fixing. So 17 power plus 1 fixing. Our Frost Elemental bumps up 7 power as well, going up, or 7%, going up to 16% to play it on turn 3, which still isn't very impressive at all. And then our Yeti on turn 2, should we need to in a pinch, is 54%. So that one actually saw a 9% increase. Interesting. Same deck, 7/7/3 split with 2 fixing. On turn 3, you can play your War Wagon 62% of the time. So a 5% increase now. So we saw it go down slightly. Or, as far as like the difference between one additional fixing and 2. Our Frost Elemental has a 23% chance now. So that one saw a 7% increase. So the double fixing actually increased the chances of that one, which makes sense because it's our splash. So now we just gave it another 20% chance, essentially, as far as in our deck, to be a primal influence, if that makes sense. Forgive me. Let me know in the comments below, guys, if when I go through all this, if it was easy to keep up with me or difficult. I would like to know so that way when I do further number crunching episodes, I can correct that, make sure you guys are understanding everything I'm putting out. Once again, I do recommend you guys trying to watch this on YouTube so you can see the numbers in front of you. And lastly, our Yeti on turn 2 has a 62% chance to being played, which actually went up 8%. So our splashes definitely saw the biggest increase, having additional fixing, versus our primary color saw a lower increase in the ability to play it. Which, I mean, when you think about percentages, it makes sense. Like, obviously, the more sources you have in the deck, then the less portion or percentage of the overall number that individual one is. So adding 1 is less impactful. I.e. like 5 sources is 20% versus 10 sources makes each one 10%. Hopefully that explained that correctly. And lastly, 3-color deck with a splash. So 2 colors and a splash, 7/7/3 with 3 fixing gives us 76% to play our War Wagon on turn 3, 31%, so another huge bump, to play our Frost Elemental on turn 3. Now, of note though, it's a huge increase, but it's still only 31%. So 7 out of 10 games, you will not be able to play this on turn 3. So how bad do you want a 3/3 for 3 flyer on turn 5 or 6? Think about that. And lastly, our Yeti on turn 2 is 68%. And then obviously just take in consideration that we are assuming that we will always be able to play our Yeti on turn 6. And which I think is pretty safe. Like if it's above 60% on turn 2, you have 6-7 more turns before you will need to play it. Yeah, you'll draw your influence by that point. Okay, guys. Let's keep on trucking. So now we have a solid 3-color deck, which is 100% viable in this format. And this one I stuck to the 17 power deck or mana base. I just wanted it for consistency purposes so we can see specifically how fixing changes the numbers. Obviously the numbers will be different if you have 15, 16, or 18 power. Granted, I don't think you're really that low of an aggressive deck if you have 3, 4, 5 colors. I don't think it's very feasible. So just something to take into consideration, but I didn't want to throw too many different numbers at you by skewing the number of power in our deck. So for the rest of the experiment, it would be 17 power. This being a solid 3-color deck, so there is no splash. This is just 100, 33% on each faction. This is a 6/6/5 power base, sticking to the same format. So 6 fire, 6 justice, 5 primal, with a 0 fixing. So just straight 17 power. Our turn 3 War Wagon has a 42% chance of being played. So that took a pretty good dip. It went from 51% to 42% by essentially dropping just 1 power. That's all we took. We took 1 power. We went from 7 to 6, so we can add additional primal. And yeah, took a huge loss there. Our Frost Elemental is at a 25%, so that is a significant bump from the earlier version. And then finally, our Yeti has a 64% chance to play it on 2, which means it's almost a pretty consistent 2 drop at this point when you really think about it. 6/6/5 split with 1 Seek power. You have a 49% chance to play our War Wagon on 3, 33% chance to play our Frost Elemental on 3, and a 70% chance to play our Avalanche Yeti on 2. 6/6/5 split with 2 fixing. We have turn 3 War Wagon 55% of the time, so we finally broke 50%, which, I mean, obviously a War Wagon, we're okay casting it on 5 and not playing it on 3, but let's say if it was a valuable 3 drop, let's say it was a Battle Mage. Yeah, see, should have probably used Battle Mage for this experiment. I guess it would just be easy enough to change because we don't really care about yeah, so for all intents and purposes, we'll use this as a Battle Mage. I should have just done that for the beginning, but you have a 55% chance to play your Battle Mage on turn 3. Frost Elemental 40%, so they're getting somewhat close now, but still above 50% versus below 50% is pretty important. You know what I mean? When you really think about half your games, you're just gonna have a dead 3 drop in your hand. And finally, our Yeti at 75%. So yeah, at this point with 17 power, essentially 7 sources, the Yeti's gonna almost always be playable. And finally, 6/6/5 split with 3 Seek powers, or 3 fixing. So once again, let's say a Rakano banner, or Huru banner, a whatever, Skycrag Stranger, and a Seek power. You will have a 61% chance to play your Battle Mage on turn 3, a 47% chance to play your Frost Elemental on turn 3. So still with 8 ways of fixing for the Frost Elemental, you're gonna be sub 50% chance to play it on turn 3. I mean, obviously I will later on for the last version give you the numbers later in the, so once again, we're using Frost Elemental, but let's say it's something like a Matriarch, right? Double. Then obviously playing it on turn 5, you have a higher chance. And I might actually do that after we finish these numbers real quick so you guys can see what that would be. But yeah, so Frost Elemental 47%, and then our Yeti 79%, so close to 80. So real quick, let's go to our influence graph real quick, and then we will add the Matriarch and see where we're at on that splash. So Matriarch, let me add that. Sorry guys. What's another double influence, because that's not coming up. Oh, Cloud. There you go. That's why it wasn't coming up, because I forgot the Cloud Snake. Okay, so add Cloud Snake, and let me fix the power once again. So 6/6/5, cut, and then all right. So with 3 Seek power, right? So we have 8 sources of primal. You will be able to play your Matriarch on turn 6 65% of the time, and a Keen Saddleback 59% of the time on turn 5. Okay, so 60% roughly to play a Saddleback on turn 5 with this kind of base. Now let's go down to 2 Seek power, 2 fixing. Now your Saddleback at turn 5 has a 52% chance of being played. Okay. And with only 1 Seek power, our Saddleback on turn 5 has a 44% chance to be played. So with only 6 and 7 sources, we're at about 50% chance to play your Saddleback on turn 5. So that is something to take in consideration with only 1 seek power and our 5 primal sigils, you have a 49% chance to play your matriarch on turn 6. So you're getting a 5% chance increase from an additional draw step, right? 1 turn. So that is definitely something to consider, guys. Like, you are definitely playing a cost when your fixing is not there. So you really have to value, and these, once again, these are double influence numbers, which really I think is where people push. I think most cases, like you see with the Avalanche Yeti being a single influence, so things like Heretics Cannon, that's a big splash card. That's where you see a lot of decks that are nowhere near fire being able to play it, because they're just, the chances of playing it are so high when it only requires, you get to see 6 or 7 draws, additional cards, and you only require 1 influence to make that card work. All right, which then leads us to our final one here, which is our 5-color good stuff. And like I mentioned earlier, I went ahead and omitted the 4-color good stuff or 4-color deck, because I feel like 4 and 5 colors kind of fall into the same category. So you could just, if you are building a 4-color deck, you can just kind of roll it up into the stats for this. So the 5-color good stuff deck, once again, guys, is, I think in most cases you'll still have a base 2-color, but you ended up just taking awesome cards in all 5 colors and you want to play them if your fixing is insane. Like, once again, Ben Glacier, Patumaro, where they value fixing quite highly. If you guys want to go check out their Farming Eternal podcast, I believe it is 2-3 episodes ago. Well, I shouldn't even say that, considering when you're going to listen to this episode. I'd have to look it up. But one of their previous episodes, they did cover this archetype. It is extremely good. You should listen to it, even if the format is rotating, because Ben Glacier mentions a lot of good theories and fundamentals and strategies to help accommodate such an archetype. So for the 5-color good stuff, we're running 17 power with a 4-4-3 split on our bait, 4-3-4-4-3-1-1. Okay, is our sigil count. So 4, let's just say 4 fire, 4 justice, 3 primal, 1 shadow, 1 time, and then 4 fixing as far as banners and etc. So actually, I need to put that back up. Gosh darn it. Sorry, that's the one I had because I wanted you guys to really see the graph on that one. So let me fix that real quick on the chart. So for my YouTube people, you guys can see that. And then I just put 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So I put insignias, but obviously it doesn't really matter. Any kind of 2-color fixing will give you these same numbers. Obviously, what the fixing is different, and that's why I didn't get too in depth in this, because is your fixing one of each? Do you have double fire fixing? Do you have triple time? Like, all that stuff makes these numbers like infinite, like the variables just go off. So once again, this is just a baseline adjustment for it. Okay, so once again, 17 power, 4-4-3-1-1 are basic sigils, and then we managed to pick up 4 banners, banners or insignias. So essentially 2-color power fixing. Okay, so baseline and 0 additional fixing, we can cast a Blurry Chaser on turn 2 65% of the time. Once again, remember, we are base Rakano. So one of our base, our fundamental 2 drops, we can play 65% of the time. Our Battle Mage on turn 3 will only be able to come down 35% of the time. So you can see now where we're starting to push it, because that immediately went sub 50% by a lot. Our Frost Elemental, with just 1 less power, goes down to 26% to play on turn 3. Okay. Our Corrupted Behemoth, which only requires 1 time influence, which is one of our extremely light splashes, but only requires 1 influence on turn 5, has a 58% chance to be played. And then our, was it Lavakin Brawler? Combustion Brawler, sorry, Combustion Brawler. Combustion Brawler will be able to be played on turn 6, 36% of the time, or turn 5, I'm sorry, turn 5, 36% of the time. So, yeah, that's, you're definitely being super greedy with being able to play all your cards on this. Okay, and I used Behemoth because it was a single influence of one of our light splashes, and then Brawler as a double influence of one of our primary colors. So that's why I picked those cards, to give you guys some reference points. Okay, next up, with a 4-4-3-1-1-4 split and 1 Seek Power, we have, let me go ahead and throw this up on the chart so you guys can see that. Okay, so our Blurry Chaser is going to have a 70% chance to be played on turn 2. Our Battle Mage will have a 41% chance to play on turn 3. Frost Elemental, 33. So 41 on our primary color, 33% on one of our splashes with just one less sigil. Okay, and our Behemoth has a 67% chance to be played on turn 5. And our Combustion Brawler has a 44. So 67 for a single influence, even being our splash, and then 44% chance for our Combustion Brawler, which is our primary color. So yeah, definitely something to take in consideration, guys. I hope this is really putting it in perspective, okay? Once again, I'm not going to go too much into fixing as far as like how to do it, because Ben Glacier and Patumaro on Farm Eternal did a great job of doing it, so you guys can check out that podcast. If you aren't already, I feel like we kind of double dip, or most of our viewership double dips, which is perfectly all right with me. I really appreciate it. All right, moving right along. Same power base. I'm not going to say it a bunch of times and throw extra numbers at you. With 2 Seek Power. Okay, 2 Seek Power, we are looking at a Blurry Chaser on turn 2, 75% of the chance, 75% of the time. So finally starting to feel comfortable about our 2-drop, finally. Okay, then we have our Battle Mage at 48%. So still sub with 2 pieces of fixing outside of our power base. War Wagon is still a 48% chance. Mind you, I am using a Praxis, a Furu and a Combre Insignia. So we have 2 additional forms of, so 6 total in our power base, and then 7, 8 using the Seek Power. So 48% chance to play War Wagon, and 40% chance to play our Frost Elemental on 3. Our Corrupted Behemoth is at 75%. So now I'm finally starting to feel good about our 5-drops. But Combustion Brawler, yeah, 52%. Like, I hope you guys, like, I hope this is putting you in perspective how sometimes being too greedy will easily cost you games. All right, that's 2 fixing, and then finally with 3 fixing. Okay, now hopefully we're starting to see a lot better. Blurry Chaser, 80% chance to play it on turn 2. Battle Mage, yep, 54%. Frost Elemental, 47% on turn 3. Combustion Brawler, 59% on turn 5. And Behemoth, 81% on turn 5. All right, so that's going to do it for our standard limited decks, if there is such a thing. But I do have a bonus deck or theory for you guys. This is the Trials of Grodov / Dark Frontier format. And so we have a cycle of legendaries that are all 5 power units that have warp and have some additional bonus text to them. One of the more popular ones is Siditi, which is a 6/6 flyer with Onslaught. When Onslaught is triggered, then it puts a curse on the enemy, in which if they do not deal any damage or no damage is dealt by the end of their turn, you draw an additional card. These cards are all extremely powerful. Siditi does require 5 influence, right? So each one has their respective colors requiring 5 influence. In set 6, we drafted a Tazboo for Science, pack 1, pick 1, which is the 5 shadow requirement one. This one is the 5 justice. And so once again, for Science, using all the fixing that we had at our disposal, tried to see if what we could do running a 5 influence requirement unit in our deck, which is just as important as well. Whenever we were talking about initially that even the standard 8-9 power base is not the most optimal power base. And so even when you're running very few colors, if your influence requirements are too high, you are going to have to accommodate your power base for that. And so I went ahead and did it. I went ahead and plugged the deck in. We actually ended up going a light, it was Combre with a light splash for Primal, simply because I wasn't planning on doing it, but we ended up picking up Sherlock Captain, which is the 5/5 flyer for 6 power, Justice, or Primal, double Primal. So we ended up taking it, and I cut it from the deck till the end, and where we got a significant amount of Huru fixing, and so I decided to put it back in. But anywho, a couple of details on the deck. We are running a total of 18 sources of, or possible sources of Justice, to include tokens, banners, insignias, basic sigils, strangers, and the Shift Stoned Count Recon Tower as fixing as well, which is really why I ran it in the deck, to be completely honest with you, and then a Trailmaker. So no Seek powers, but I already broke down all these things. 18 sources can generate Justice. So to give you an idea on the numbers, how often we would have been able to actually play the Siditi on curve, i.e. on turn 5 for 5 Justice influence, we would have been at 60% on turn 5 with 18 sources in a limited deck. Okay, so not bad. Like, we managed to be above 50%, which is better than I anticipated. That being said, also looking at the odds, it also says that with this power base that I plugged in, we had an 84% chance to have 5 power by turn 5. So not bad, not bad. 15% chance for not having enough power, and then 35% chance to not have 5 Justice influence. Now going up to turn 6, which is actually extremely impressive, the fact that we bump up from 60% to 72%. That's a 12% increase in our chances of playing Siditi simply by drawing 1 additional card. So if that shows you any kind of power to drawing cards, extra cards, that is a good example right there. Bumping up to turn 7, we go up 10% to 82%. And then ironically, in turn 8, so 7 to 8, we only bump up 7%, going from 82% to 89% chance to playing Siditi, or being able to play Siditi. Obviously, you have to have it in hand and then have the influence. But overall, so once again, 18 sources of power, and we were still only at a 60% chance to play Siditi on curve. I do think that's actually pretty good for limited. But yeah, now let's go back to our, for example, Steel Legion, right? Steel Legion so Siditi was 60% on turn 5. Steel Legion was 84% on turn 5. So, I mean, we're talking about a 24% increase in the ability to play a double versus a single. So, yeah, just take that into consideration, guys. I hope you enjoyed that bonus part. So, that is going to do it for our number crunching portion of this this podcast. A couple of takeaways I'd like to leave you guys with, something to consider. I am always a big fan of teaching someone how to fish instead of handing them the fish, so you can continue to feed yourself forever, right? It is, now you understand why it is important to identify the requirements or value single influence cards over double influence cards. Right? Going back to our 5-color good stuff example, the difference between playing a single influence behemoth on turn 5 and a double influence combustion brawler on turn 5 was a 20% difference. 20%, guys. Take that into consideration when you're thinking about things like how often there's a card just sitting in your hand, unable to play it, right? You want to minimize that as much as possible. And so losing a card simply to power base is a huge cost, especially when it's an impactful card like that. So there is an importance in valuing single influence versus double influence, not just, oh, this is a card I want to splash. This is not. Okay. On that note, I will say that for me personally, I think just kind of a baseline, I would like to see a minimum of 6 pieces of fixing for a single influence card. So this is, you're talking about, or 6 sources, I would say, is the minimum I would like for a single requirement. I say fixing, but essentially, having banners, things that give you more than one influence, as well as something that gives you that specific influence. That way, I think that gives you the most decent chances. For example, our behemoth is a 76% chance to be played on curve when you have 6 sources. For double influence, this is being a little conservative. Or risky. I would still actually go even higher than this, but I would want a minimum of 8. Because even doing 7, like we saw in our last example of the 5-color good stuff, our brawler still was only at a 61% chance. And this is 7, right? Or 7 ways of playing it. It's still 61%. That means 40% of the time it's just gonna sit in your hand, and you don't want to lose games to that. So 8 sources for a double cost top end, I would definitely consider. So speaking of top end, that is something else that you want to look at, is when you want to be playing this card. As you saw, there is a big difference in drawing a card. Like with this Sididi, we gained a significant increase in chances to be able to play it simply by drawing an additional card. So things like, for example, Char is a phenomenal card, but Char is something you want to use in the early game. Get out, stop early aggression, or get early units, early blockers out of the way. Late game, Char loses a significant amount of value. So Char is not really the card you want to be splashing, because of the fact that you want to see it early game where you have the least amount of chances to actually be able to play it when you want to. Now, the flip side to that, something like we mentioned, our example, Avalanche, Yeti, and Heretic Cannon are both extremely powerful cards that come down at the earliest turn 6. So that gives you an additional 6 cards to look at to potentially draw the power requirement you need, or influence requirement you need to play those cards. And so those are much more viable splashes. Cards that you want to play later in the game are what allows you to facilitate a accurate or correct splash, because you're not worried about seeing these cards early. So you're giving yourself the highest chance of being able to play it when you need it or on curve. So definitely value that. Something that goes earlier in the game, you are less inclined to splash for them. All right. Now, the other thing is you want to look at things that have fixing on them, right? Because you don't want your fixing to cost you a card. We mentioned this a little earlier with things like the strangers and the banners and the insignias, where they give you the additional influence at no additional cost, i.e. the strangers tack on 2 influence, or 1 depending if it's on color or not, for not really the cost of a card, because you are going to play a 2/2 for 2 anyways in your curve, right? That being said, one of the examples I did use is where if you do require the influence on a stranger prior to casting another card in your hand, the 2 cost of that stranger may potentially mean that you're not able to cast that bigger card on curve or at that point. And so there is a cost to it. Additional things like Awaken the Aegis, where it does give you fixing, but it literally costs you a card, is a high price to pay. Granted, Awaken the Aegis does ramp you, but that's a different story. But yeah, it costs you a card slot in your deck, and B, it will cost you power and some tempo to do it. So those are things you want to look for. Tokens, once again, we touched on that, where when you're deck building, it essentially can count as all 3 of the influence, but when you end up playing it in practice, it is only going to give you 1. So that goes back to our single influence over our double influence. If you have, let's say you're running a 3-color deck and you require double influence of each color, right? And you have, let's say, 2/1/1, the token is only going to give you 1 of those lacking influences, right? So you'll finish that turn with 2/1 influence instead of, let's say, for example, if it was a banner, you had the chance of having double of all 6. So that is where the tokens kind of lack a little bit of power and lack a little bit of flexibility, and where single influence units or spells are significantly higher than double influence, right? All right, guys, that I think is going to do it with our takeaways. I hope you got something out of that. Let me know in the comments below, or let me know when I'm streaming live that how you felt about this. I'm going to try to add some more science-based, number crunching-based episodes to it, because I feel like it gives you the opportunity to fall back on something that isn't emotional or theory, right? And it allows you to justify or better understand what was the correct play, or maybe a situation where maybe you might have not had an out and you're beating yourself up for no good reason. So things like that. I like having actual facts to back up certain things. A good example is the what's the play that I did, I did the double draft tournament with Patumaro, and I was fortunate enough to record it and post it. And Ben Gracier went ahead and did an after actions review on the match, and there was a different line of play that he would have done, and I think both lines were correct. I do think his was significantly better though, because he is a phenomenal player and really is able to break down game board states. But he did go ahead and admit that the way the draws lined up between the two of us, that I was really not in a position to win that game anyways, because Patumor just kind of had it all, essentially. And so even though I didn't make the most optimal plays, I am able to not tilt and take away a positive from that and not dwell on it, because of the fact that regardless, the outcome might have been the same. And so, yeah, that's where I like falling on the numbers, and it helps you make those tight decisions, whether you're trying to play an additional power or not, and whether you should play this bomb or not, and things like that, where you really want to play it, you really want to, but you're not really sure if you should or not. You can go fall back to the numbers, and that will give you a clear-cut answer. But all right, guys, that is going to do it for this portion. Once again, let me know how you felt about this one, and if you would like to see more stuff like this in the future. But with that, let's go on to what's the play. Our what's the play this week is yet again a bit of an interesting one. So we'll go ahead and discuss it. So our opponent is at 7 power. They are Argenport, so 2 Justice, 5 Shadow. They are at 7 life with 1 card in hand, and they topped deck that card. On the board, they have the Brawler. Gosh, I always forget the name of this guy. But the 3/3 for 5, and then when you empower, it gets a +1 flying. Or I'm sorry, it gets flying and Warcry. Say a +1, I'll explain in a minute. They have a 5/3 Warhawk, a 4/3 Battle Mage with the Age is still intact, and the 1/1 Wagoneer that when it empowers, it gets a +2/+2 for each unit you have in play. Okay, they are currently attacking with the Brawler and the Wagoneer. As you notice, all their guys have an additional attack. That was because they had the Grenadin Bellower that died and gave all their guys a +1 attack. On our side of the board, we have 0 power. We're 0-5, sorry. Did I mention they're at 7? They're at 7. We are at 14 with a Retribution in hand. Once again, we are at 5 power. They with Fire, Justice, Time, and Primal Influence. We have a 4/4 Skycrag Stranger that has the machete attached to it. That's why it's a 4/4. We have a 3/3 Yeti Instigator, a 2/2 Praxis Stranger, and a 2/2 Rakano Stranger. The 4/4 and the 3/3 are exhausted from attacking, so we have just the 2/2 Strangers ready to block. Once again, we are at 14. Our opponent is at 7. We have a Retribution in hand. So, I beg to ask you, what's the play? Now, I will say this. On our previous turn, we had both Strangers in our hand. And so we had the option of either 1 Stranger and Retribution or 2 Strangers. So what have you done there? I decided to go with double Stranger. For this clip, I don't have that up, but I can either way. I remember this. Anywho, so I don't think there's too many very lines you could play. I'll just go through my logic behind this. So right now we identify that they're swinging at us for 12. So we're not dead. I think the opponent made a mistake here by not swinging all out. The reason being is swinging all out would put us on, or them on, having lethal. So we would have been forced to block here, minimizing our board. And best case scenario, we would have double blocked the Battle Mage, losing both our guys and them losing 1. But once again, them attacking with everything would have put 9 power in the air, taking us down to only 6 life left. So we could have essentially probably double or chump blocked the 8/7 and left us with 1/2/2 left, and we would have been at, let me see, 9. We would have been at 1. So I think it was an opponent's mistake here, not attacking with everything. And there is a lesson there for you guys to learn, that sometimes you really want to give your opponent the least amount of draw steps possible and close out the game. Granted, I understand I am victim of being extremely conservative as well, because there have been enough times where I have gone for it and been blowout and lost the game by them having something. But the fact that we were tapped out with 1 card in hand made me feel like it was fairly safe to go all out, because, at the very least, you were going to take 1 unit off the board. We decided to, after doing the math, and realized they only had 12 damage on board, and they had a significant board presence. We're far behind in that retrospect. I decided, and the retribution being able to be activated offensively to stun a unit, I decided that my line of play to give us the highest chance of winning this game is just put them on having 1 card that does nothing in this combat right now, and just not blocking and taking the 12, going to 2, leaving all 4 of our units intact. That's what we end up doing. And like we called it, they did not have a combat trick or anything to finish us off. Granted, if they had a unit, reason being, if we crack back, right, with the retribution, their Warhawk cannot block, so they have only the battle mage left. That means they'll block our 4/4, and we still have exactly 7 damage on board to kill them. That is another reason why we decided not to block here, because we had the opportunity to crack back and kill them the following turn. They ended up having a play, though, which could have been detrimental to us. If they had any unit, we would have been stuck and not had lethal, but once again, that was a risk we had to take because we were not winning this board state. But luckily, the card they had was Trusty Revolver. And so they played the Trusty Revolver on the Battle Mage, which essentially did absolutely nothing to change our game plan, as we were planning on losing a unit to the Battle Mage regardless. And we always figured it was going to be our largest unit. And so we draw a banner, which does nothing for us, but that's fine. Stick to the plan. We go ahead and offensively use a retribution pre-combat to stun and silence the Warhawk, giving them only 1 blocker. We attack with all 4 of our units. They block the 4/4 and still take 7 and die. So we took that game down. So that is what's the play, which leads, we're at the end of our show. That's right, guys. So I want to go ahead and just say thank you guys so much for tuning in this week. I hope you got something out of this show. I hope you enjoyed it. I can't stress enough, I do appreciate everyone's feedback, so both positive and negative. You can send it my way via email, via Twitter, or Discord, and I would be happy to adjust and troubleshoot and see how I can improve the show. So speaking of reaching me, you guys can email me directly at EJthePodcast@gmail.com if you want to talk to me online but really offline. You can follow me on Twitter at EJthePodcast, where I post when I go live. I post when new videos go up, new podcasts like this, as well as just what's the plays, what's the picks, things like that. All go up on there. Give shout outs to streamers and things like that. So definitely follow me there. And YouTube, EJ the Podcast on YouTube, where you can catch the video version of this podcast, as well as draft videos, sealed videos, tournament reports, all that good stuff is on there. Definitely check it out. If you can't catch me streaming live, you can catch all my content there. Speaking of live, come hang out. I stream every Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday mornings Central Time at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. And hang in there. We'll talk picks together. We'll talk about plays. You guys can watch me punt in real time. And we just kind of have a good time and hang out. So you're more than welcome to join me there. And lastly, if you want to follow my real life stuff, my circus performances, my fire performances, cosplay, fitness, all the other good stuff, you can follow me on my Instagram at CaesarLebear7. But all right, guys, that is going to do it. So once again, quick shout out to Ben Gracier and Pratumaro on the Farming Eternal podcast. You guys should check out that 5-color good stuff episode they did. It is actually extremely informative, both for this format, but there is plenty of stuff to take away for future formats. And all the streamers that rated me, as well as all the new follows and subscribers to my Twitch channel. I really, really appreciate that. By all means, of course, if you want to support this content and me, Make sure whatever way you are consuming this content, you are liking, subscribing, sharing, rating, thumbs upping, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. It goes a long way towards helping me grow my community, as well as just know that I'm on the right path and what things I'm doing right, what things I'm doing wrong. So thank you guys once again for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Hopefully next week I will have some new stuff from set 7 that I'll be able to spoil with you guys. But until then, as always, happy gaming.